I was never the kind of person who cared about money. I grew up in a humble family, but one full of love. My parents always did everything they could to give me a good education, and I knew I'd have to work hard to earn my place in the world. But back then, that never really bothered me, at least not until I realized that for some people, what you have matters more than who you are. I met Andrew in college. Coming from a wealthy and influential family, he seemed like the perfect guy. Thoughtful, intelligent, ambitious. We dated for a year, and he never showed any issues with my background. In fact, my family barely ever came up in conversation. We never talked about what my parents did for a living or how they lived. So when he proposed, I truly believed I was living a fairy tale. But everything fell apart right before the wedding. I will never forget that night. I got home and found him acting different, cold, distant. He was holding some papers, looking something up on his phone. And then, without hesitation, he threw it in my face. He had found out my family was poor, that my dad was a mechanic and my mom was a housekeeper. He said he couldn't marry me because it would hurt his image and his family's business. At that moment, my whole world collapsed. It wasn't just the engagement being called off. It was realizing that the man I loved had never really loved me. To him, I was just a piece in his social game. He didn't even give me time to process it. That same day, he asked me to move out of the apartment we shared, leaving me with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart. I cried so much that night. But in the middle of my tears, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone make me feel less than just because I wasn't born rich. And if Andrew thought I wasn't good enough for him, one day I'd prove that he was the biggest loser in this story. After being tossed aside by my ex-fiancé like I was nothing, I packed my stuff and moved to Chicago. Thankfully, my best friend, Chloe, took me in at her tiny apartment. I was emotionally wrecked, but she helped me pick up the pieces. I won't lie. Those first few months were pure hell. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and to make things worse, I had no clear plan on how to start over. But somewhere in that mess, something inside me started to shift. I could spend years dwelling on Andrew's rejection, or I could turn that pain into fuel to become someone better. That's when I made the decision that changed my life. I was going to follow my dream of becoming an architect. It wasn't easy. My savings were almost gone, so I had to get a job as an assistant at a small architecture firm while studying at night. My days were spent dealing with spreadsheets and organizing projects, and by night, I was in class, completely exhausted. My routine was basically studying, working, and sleeping just enough to not pass out the next day. Time went by. Slowly, I started growing in the company, gaining experience, and most importantly, learning that a person's true worth isn't measured by their bank account, but by their resilience. So on the day I finally held my diploma in my hands, looked at myself in the mirror and realized I was no longer the girl who got left behind. After years of hard work, I finally got where I wanted to be. I opened my own architecture firm, and my name started making the rounds among important clients. What once felt impossible was now my reality. It was a regular morning at the office when my assistant walked in, excited. She told me a new client had scheduled a meeting, and it sounded like a promising deal. As always, I went over the project details before the appointment. The client's name didn't stand out to me at first. I hadn't thought about him in years. But the moment the door opened, my stomach dropped. Andrew was standing there, but he wasn't the same anymore. His expensive suit looked a little worn. His eyes carried a weight that hadn't been there before. When he finally looked up and recognized me, I saw his expression shift. First, shock. Then, something that looked like fear. And then, with a tight throat, he said my name. Jennifer. It was the first time I had heard that voice in so many years. Andrew's expression was pure discomfort. He blinked a few times, like he was trying to process the fact that the woman sitting across from him, successful, confident, unshaken, was the same one he tossed aside years ago. And me? I kept my composure. I didn't let the storm inside me show. I simply folded my hands on the table and asked, in the most professional tone possible, "How can I help you?" That's when I found out that Andrew was no longer the man I once knew. At least, not when it came to his status. His family's company had gone bankrupt after a series of bad decisions and financial scandals. Without the resources that had funded his lavish lifestyle, he was trying to start over in real estate. The project he needed an architect for was his last shot at getting back on top, and ironically, I was his best option. He tried to pull himself together, but I could see the tension all over him. He avoided making eye contact for too long, like he was expecting some kind of reaction from me. Maybe he thought I'd throw everything back in his face, humiliate him the way he once humiliated me. I listened carefully to every detail of his project. I asked technical questions, kept things strictly professional. While he stumbled over his words, I took notes as if he were just another desperate client. And the more I stayed in control, the smaller he seemed to shrink in his chair. By the end of the meeting, Andrew took a deep breath and said, "Would you be willing to work on this project with me?" I met his eyes and smiled. "Of course, but everything will be done on my terms." The truth? I didn't need this job, but after everything he put me through, there was something deeply satisfying about seeing him on the other side, needing me. I wanted to prove to myself that I held no grudges anymore, that my success spoke louder than any cheap revenge. But if I said I didn't enjoy every second of that moment, I'd be lying. The meetings were almost a spectacle. Andrew, who once looked down on me, now carefully chose his words, as if afraid I'd walk away at any moment. And me? I kept my posture flawless, reviewing contracts, making design suggestions, and handling everything with the utmost professionalism. But he was trying something else. At first it was small comments. "You've changed a lot. I always knew you were talented." Then came the forced nostalgia, bringing up old memories as if they still meant something to me. And then, one night, after a long meeting, he finally said the words I knew were coming. "Jennifer, I was an idiot. I messed up." Ah, the classic "I regret everything" speech, he went on, saying he had been immature, that he regretted what he did, that he realized I was an incredible woman, and that maybe we could try again. I looked him straight in the eyes and, with the calmest and sharpest voice I could manage, said, "Andrew, you left me because I wasn't good enough for you. Now I'm successful. But do you know what you still are? The same man who dumped me for status, and I would never choose someone like that." His face went pale. I grabbed my bag, stood up, and gave him one last look. "See you at the next meeting. Have a good night." And I walked away. I had never tasted something so sweet, but the best part was still to come. After that night, Andrew never brought up the past again. I think he finally understood there was no room for second chances. The project moved forward, and as always, I gave it my best. On the finalization day, he came to my office to sign the last documents. He looked different, quieter, more tense. When we were done, he hesitated before standing up. "Thank you, Jennifer." That was the last thing I ever heard from him. No arrogance, no desperate attempts to win me back. Just a defeated man, fully aware of his mistake. And you know what I felt? Nothing. No anger, no resentment. Because in the end, my biggest triumph wasn't seeing him broke and desperate. That night, I went out to celebrate with Chloe, sitting in a fancy restaurant, raising a glass to my success.